I decided to do a compilation video combining my best advice on how to buy a new motorcycle, and in particular, how to buy a new Harley Davidson motorcycle. Some of these videos I did a few years ago, but it's amazing how true that this information still remains, this advice. So check it out. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. I cover the general tactics that the dealerships use to get you in way over your head on a bike, get the most money for them, the least money for you, sign you up for really long-term high interest rate loans. I cover the whole gamut. So again, this is a compilation of 3 previous videos, but I think taken as a whole, it's a pretty useful reference. So again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, and here we go.
Based on your feedback, which caused me to recall some of my own experience, I thought it was only fair to discuss how some dealers screw their customers, or at least try to screw their customers. Unfortunately, I have first-hand experience with this. At the end of 2018, I was looking to buy a new Street Glide Special, so I called around to various Harley dealers. None of them would give me any pricing over the phone. Couldn't get any information off their websites. So I ended up going into a dealer near me and told them I was already familiar with the bike. I didn't need to test ride it. So they sat down right away and wanted to talk numbers. I had a trade. I knew I had a little bit of equity in the trade, so I owed more than it was worth, it was worth more than I owed on it, and knew the price of the Street Glide Special, at least MSRP off the Harley website. I knew they were going to try and get me with some fees and so on. So right off the bat, the salesman hits me with this, what's called a 4-square close worksheet. Last time I saw one of these things was back in the 80s when I was trying to buy a car from this shady car dealer. But you can see how it's divided up. There's 1 square for your trade, price of the new bike, how much down payment you're going to put down, and then your monthly payment. So the first few blocks are for show, really. And this is an example that comes from the Consumer Reports website. I didn't keep my worksheet when I ended up leaving the dealership when I was trying to do a deal on the Street Glide Special, but this gives you an idea how this thing works. So they'll put down the value of your trade, and then assume you don't owe any money. So in this case, you would net out $3,000 for trading in your Camry. The price of the new vehicle you're looking at is $25,500. A $4,000 down payment, and then they focus on the monthly payment. They put $520 a month, and basically say if that fits in with your budget, would you go ahead and buy the bike and initial here? It's kind of a deal. So just looking at some rough numbers, the equity side of things would be the $3,000 and the $4,000 down payment, so $7,000. So we're looking at a net purchase price of $18,500. Well, they don't say what the term of the payments is. Is it 36 months? Is it 48 months? Let's say it's 48 months. Just do some quick mental math. Say 50 months, just to make it easy, times 500 a month would be 25,000. So we'll end up paying 25,000 for an $18,000 vehicle. That's well in excess of even what the highest interest rates would be. So they're really padding the sale into the monthly payment, and what they're showing for your trade is just buried. So instead, what I like to do is, if I get hit with a 4-square deal like this, I'll flip it over. But this will give you an example what I experienced at my local Harley dealership. But you can go to NADA, and this gives you a range of suggested retail, which is a big range, $8,500 to $14,400. Obviously, they're not going to give me retail for my trade. So I may look at Kelley Blue Book. It shows a trade value of around $7,500. So let's be really conservative and say I want to get at least $6,500 for my trade. Since I owe, well, let's say $7,500. I think is fair. So since I owe $6,500, that would be $1,000 credit to me. And let's say I'm looking at a 2020 Street Glide Special. It's pretty close to the same price as the 2018 that I was looking at, or 2019 I was looking at in 2018. So the price of the bike's around $27,000. They're going to try and hit you with full freight, setup, documentation fee, and they're not going to try and discount their bike at all. Let's just say they're holding strong and they want $28,500 for their bike. So if I flip the sheet over, I just look at what the net is. So if I've got $1,000 trade value net, $2,000 down payment, and a $28,500 purchase price of the bike, that leaves me with $25,500 that I'm going to finance. And at 60 months at 4% interest, that should be around $469 a month. And you can go to these websites and you can have it run on your smartphone, or just run it with ballpark numbers and write it down on a sheet of paper before you get to the dealership, so you have a good idea what you're looking at. And here's another example, I'll show you what your payments are going to be. Instead, you're going to get a dealer that's running the Foursquare scam on you, something like this. The whole idea is just to completely confuse you and to ultimately focus just on the monthly payments. So in my case, they show me netting $2,000 for my trade, selling their bike for $29,000. I think I had some accessories plus the fees and an additional $2,000 deposit. But then I look at the monthly payment block of the Foursquare closing form, and they showed $540 a month payment for 72 months. Well, 540 times 72 plus the 2,000 for my trade plus the 2,000 for my down payment would mean I'd pay $43,000 for a $29,000 bike. I mean, I couldn't believe it that they pulled this on me. I mean, I'm in my 50s. Obviously, this isn't the first vehicle I've ever purchased. I mean, I told them I've purchased at least a dozen motorcycles and a few dozen cars in my time. And they just said, well, you know, that's how we start with everybody. We start high and then work from there. And I told them, that anybody like that I wasn't going to do business with. It just, makes me think of my oldest kids. They're in their early 20s. I can't imagine them trying to go to a car dealer or a motorcycle dealer without assistance and getting gamed like this on a Foursquare close. I was thinking too at the time, it was so outrageous what they were doing. How could Harley Davidson allow a dealer to operate like this? And then it dawned on me is that Harley Davidson doesn't care as long as these people are selling bikes. And 2/3 of every motorcycle sold at a Harley Davidson dealership is financed. I think it's really predatory sales practice, and they also have very predatory financing, in my opinion. I'll get to that other topic here in a moment, but a lot of times if you're going in to look at a motorcycle, you obviously have to give them your driver's license and a copy of your insurance card. And I've heard from many people that they've had their credit checked while they were out on the test ride without their knowledge. And, I don't think it's so much to figure out if you can buy a motorcycle. They'll pretty much figure out a way to get you financed. I think it's a way to identify people with problem credit so that they could focus on the monthly payments. It's quite a racket. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be more of these shady dealers around than less. I mean, Harley's trying to go from about 700 dealerships down to 600 here in the next year or so. And at the third quarter earnings call last week, the CEO of Harley Davidson said that, well, yeah, they're closing a few dealerships, but most of the ones that are closing are owned by people that own only one or two stores. So in other words, no big deal. They're clearly favoring the mega dealers with high volume, and I think in many cases high pressure or predatory sales tactics. But I still have a vivid memory of that whole experience. I mean, I immediately left when I realized they were going to try and get me to pay $43,000 for a $29,000 motorcycle, and they had 2 or 3 of their people, their salesmen and sales managers, chase me out into the parking lot trying to get me back in to resume, quote, negotiations. I told them it's just too outrageous for me to give them the time of day. Another thing that's frustrating is with my Street Glide Special as an example, it comes with subpar rear shocks in my opinion. I often go to like to ride it a little bit in sporty fashion on some of the twisties near my home. It's not a sport bike, but I do like to get some spirited riding in on occasion. So I went back to the dealer, and I didn't buy from that scammy dealer. I found one out further out from the metro area that was very reasonable. But about a year later, I purchased some Russ Wernemont design shocks, rear shocks for my Street Glide Special, the 13-inch shocks. And I went back to the dealership where I'd spent like $29,000 buying my Street Glide Special and asked them to install these shocks for me. Obviously, they're going to charge. I mean, didn't expect they'd do it for free, but they told me that no, they weren't allowed to put on any components on a motorcycle that wasn't purchased through the dealership, and in all likelihood through Harley Davidson's supply chain. I mean, well, so going back to the shocks, I ended up going to a metric dealer that I have a relationship with. I've also bought many bikes from them, and it was January, so they were kind of slow here in the Midwest, and they put them on for me. I mean, why couldn't the Harley dealer do that? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But the flip side of this is that people have had components or accessories put on their motorcycle or Harley Davidson motorcycle, which ended up voiding the factory warranty, and the dealer put the parts on and didn't tell them that that was going to happen. I just it's quite a squeeze between the predatory sales practices, on the financing with the aftermarket prices are high to begin with, and they won't put it on unless you buy those parts from them in the first place. And then in some cases you may be looking at getting your warranty voided if you're not real careful. So please let me know your thoughts.
Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. I realized there might be some interest in how to approach buying a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Now, if you have experience with buying other brands of motorcycles or say cars, this experience still may not fully prepare you for the hardcore sales practices employed by some Harley Davidson motorcycle dealers. The main thing to keep in mind is to have fun with the process and don't get stressed out. If a dealer is stressing you out, just leave and go somewhere else. The first step in buying a motorcycle is obviously to decide the year, model, and color, and whether you plan to buy a new or used bike. Let's say you want to buy a new 2020 Street Glide Special in the Performance Orange color. I really like this bike and this color. Now, as a backup, I figure out what other color bike I would consider buying in case they didn't have the orange bike in stock, like let's say the one in stone washed white pearl. Keep in mind they could probably get the bike in the color that you want by trading with another dealer, but this isn't going to get me the best deal if they've got to make a trade. So let's assume that you're going to try and get the best deal on a bike, so you're not going to the dealer on the first warm Saturday in the spring if you live in the Midwest, or you're not going to go to the dealer in July and tell them you want to buy a bike to ride to Sturgis, since you'll lose a lot of leverage in these instances. If you can, buying a bike in the winter or choosing a prior year bike after the new models hit the showroom floor can often save you the most money. Now, with any other brand of motorcycle or with a car, I will call or email the internet sales manager or the sales manager, tell them which bike I wanted, see if they had one in stock, then ask for their out-the-door price excluding sales tax. That is just the cost of the bike plus whatever fees they would charge, such as freight, setup, and documentation charges. The problem is I've never gotten a Harley dealer in my metro area to give me such pricing over the phone or through email. Most of these dealers won't even list prices of new bikes on their website or even in their showroom. So the next step I would normally do is to go to Cycle Trader and search for the bike and sort from low price to high price. You do this with other manufacturer of bikes. You'll often see dealers selling certain bikes below MSRP. Now, some of this is clickbait, but some are legitimate deals, so you'll have to follow up with phone or email contact on the Cycle Trader site and confirm the out-the-door price. If you get lucky and find a dealer who will give you detailed pricing information before actually going to the dealership, that's great. Otherwise, you're going to have to enter the arena or the octagon, that is, go to the dealer and try to negotiate a good deal. Now, before you head to the dealer, contact your bank or credit union to find out what loan amount you qualify for and at what interest rate and terms. Also, what kind of down payment you'll have to include. They will also give you an approximate monthly payment amount. Buying a bike with no trade is clearly the easiest way to know what kind of deal you're getting on a new bike. But if you have a bike to trade, go to sites such as NADA or Kelley Blue Book to get a handle on your trade value. Also, you should check Cycle Trader to see what similar bikes are selling for in your area. You can also check to see if the dealer where you plan to go is already selling a bike similar to yours. Keep in mind that most dealers are going to try and make at least $1,000 profit by taking your bike and flipping it on your trade, so be realistic in what a fair trade value will be for your bike. Finally, if you owe money on the bike, call your lender to get a 10-day payoff number. When you go to the Harley dealer, initially focus solely on the price of the new or used bike. If they ask you whether you're going to trade in a new bike, say you don't know yet. Now, I'm all for operating in good faith, but there's no reason to share all of your information with the dealer right out of the gate if you're dealing with a high-pressure sales operation, which some Harley-Davidson dealers clearly are. Keep in mind that they are professional salespeople. They do this many times a day, and compared to them, we're simply amateur buyers. Ask them for the out-the-door price excluding sales tax. That is the price of the bike plus any fees like freight, setup, and documentation fees on the new motorcycle. Keep negotiating step by step. Don't go to the next step, which would be the value of your trade if you have one, until you're satisfied with the price of their bike you want to buy. Whatever you do, don't get pulled into the Foursquare close scam. The goal of the Foursquare close is to confuse you and get you to make a purchase decision based solely on the monthly payment. I had a dealer try to trick me into paying $43,000 for a $29,000 Street Glide special one time using this Foursquare trickery. In following my advice, you're basically following each section of the Foursquare close, except you're only doing one square at a time and not all at once like they try and do to confuse you. So for a Harley Street Glide special, I try to get the bike at MSRP, including the cost of all their extra fees, but I'd probably start out with the price of the bike plus the fees and be about $1,000 below that amount. So in other words, MSRP plus their fees minus $1,000. This is where they'd probably say they can't sell below MSRP because the bikes are in such high demand due to limited production. The limited production is true to some extent, but there are also fewer people buying motorcycles these days and even fewer people buying Harleys, as they are losing market share each year. I think their market share is down around 42% of the big 600cc plus displacement bikes these days, when it used to be well over 50% a few years ago. I mean, they told me the same thing, that there weren't enough bikes to go around back in 2018, but I knew better because there was a ton of bikes sitting around on the showroom floor. Hopefully with some back and forth, I hold strong and they agree to sell at MSRP, including their extra fees. Now, I've been in the position where I was about $800 above MSRP with their fees. I thought, yeah, that's close enough. Let's get this deal done. And then what turned out to be my secret weapon, that is my wife, steps in. I was ready to do the deal, and my wife says she'll only agree to the price at MSRP out the door with no other charges. I mean, the reason I got into this position is I've bought and traded about 8 bikes in the last 6 years. I kept getting sport bikes thinking she'd be comfortable riding 2 up until I found out otherwise and started getting touring bikes. I explained to the sales manager, and hopefully by this point you're dealing with a sales manager or general manager, with my wife out of earshot, that I was sorry, but she wouldn't go for the deal and we'd have to walk if they didn't take it. I didn't intend for things to happen this way, but it worked out well, and I was surprised they took my wife's deal, and I was glad I got the bike at her price. Otherwise I'd been in the doghouse for spending too much. So let's say right now I'm at a total of $28,500. That includes the price of their bike, all their fees, and I'm going to get roughly $500 in dealer installed accessories. This is a good point to negotiate any accessories that you want to have put on the bike, because you can include that in the financing if you need to, and also they'll typically take 20 to 30% off between the price of the accessory and its installation. They're probably more inclined to discount accessories than they are the price of the bike. Now let's go back to the negotiation, assuming that you have a bike to trade in. Once you're satisfied that they've gone as low as possible on the price of their new bike, and assuming you're okay with that price, tell them that you've decided that you can't really afford to keep your old bike and will need to trade it in. If it's a non-Harley, it may take more time for them to come up with a number for your trade. They may need to call other non-Harley dealers or a motorcycle wholesaler. I've tried calling a Harley dealer in advance about my potential trade in the past, and just like trying to get a price of their new bike over the phone, they wouldn't tell me anything without being there in person. So let's say you reasonably trade your bike for around the Kelley Blue Book trade value, or the bottom end of the NADA value, which would leave you netting around $1,000 for your trade after you account for what you owe on the bike. The dealer may say he'll only give you enough for, say, $500 net on your trade. This might be close enough to do the deal, but likely they'll make you an offer that is far lower, maybe just enough to cover what you owe, or worse yet, what would cause you to have negative equity that have to be added to the cost of the new bike. They may really try to devalue your trade if it's a non-Harley in particular, since most Harley dealers won't sell other brands even if they're used. But the fact is, they might own a sister metric store, be buddies with a non-Harley dealer nearby, or simply sell the bike to a wholesaler, so they should really be able to flip your trade in some fashion without too much difficulty. So just like with the price of the new bike, you may have to decide if you're happy with the trade-in price. If so, time to move on to the next step. Tell them you'll buy the new bike at the price you agreed to earlier if they will take your trade-in bike at what you agreed to, but only if they agree to finance at a rate lower than what you got from your bank or credit union. Say you got your bank or credit union to approve you at 4% APR for 60 months with a minimum down payment of $1,500, which your trade would cover. Tell them if they can get below 4%, you will finance with them. If not, tell them you'll have to do the deal with an outside lender, and be sure to note as much on the sale agreement that it's subject to approved financing at 4% or lower. In all likelihood, they'll just slightly beat the 4% or match the 4% to get the deal done on the spot. If you don't have a trade-in bike, be prepared to put at least 10 or 15% down payment on the bike. At the end, be sure that all of your numbers are correct for sales price, trade-in value, and payment terms, and get all those numbers correctly transferred to the sales contract. Also, beware of them inflating your monthly payment amount by some seemingly small number like $20 a month after you've already checked all the correct numbers. I've had this happen to me a number of times. If you're going for a 60-month loan, this small increase would cost you an extra $1,200 in payments over the course of the loan, wiping out your hard-fought negotiated price on the price of the new bike or trade-in. That's why I like to use my smartphone and plug in all the numbers myself to check what the dealer is doing. You can go to the various websites for loan calculators like this one from the NADA website. If you end up walking on the deal, keep in mind all your numbers that you had talked about with this dealer and go to a different dealer. Even if it was a dealer that wouldn't give you the time of day at first, you've got a lot more detailed information with which to negotiate. Ask for the sales manager or even general manager and see if they agree to your numbers for the price of the bike and the value of your trade before you even go there. You might even do this with an out-of-town dealer. You could do the paperwork over the internet or fax. I mean, some people still fax, and you can even have them deliver the bike to you. Even if you have to pay a delivery fee, you could end up saving more money on the deal. Now let's go talk about extended warranties for a minute. Prepaid service plans, VIP service plans, gap insurance, and we've already talked about the accessories. I usually skip the extended warranties and prepaid maintenance, which is a good thing since I ended up frequently trading bikes the last few years. They'll try and tell you that these items will add value to a trade-in, but you only get pennies on the dollars, if anything, at trade-in. VIP plans are a waste of money, in my opinion. This is where they offer to expedite servicing your bike or will offer to pick it up and bring it back to your home and business. Some dealers will do this for free, especially in the Midwest during winter months when their service department is often pretty slow. Now for prepaid maintenance, I have dealers tell me that, your bike is going to need to be maintained, so why not go ahead and pay for it and get a discount? My answer is just because I know I'm probably going to eat at McDonald's 50 times or more over the next year doesn't mean I'm going to prepay for my Big Macs. They generally don't appreciate this response, but with so many Harley-Davidson dealers going out of business these days, do you really want to risk prepaying for a service that you might not be able to take advantage of nearby? As far as gap insurance, you should get this if you rolled a lot of negative equity from your trade into the purchase of the new bike, or if you're not putting much of a down payment down. This type of insurance pays the difference between what you owe on a bike and the market value of the bike in the event of a loss, like collision, theft, or vandalism. So good luck out there. My parting thoughts are no dealers will sell you anything cheaper than they want to, and you don't have to buy it for more than you want to. Hopefully, in the end, you'll end up with a bike that will provide you with many years of enjoyable riding. Well, I was goofing around on the internet and I stumbled across Harley Davidson's website. I noticed an ad for people interested in Ultra Limited, and Harley was offering to sell that bike for $29,800 MSRP. Of course, it excludes other fees and surcharges and things like that. But they said for top tier credit, they would finance with a down payment of 10% on the bike, so $2,980 for an 8-year loan terms, that's 96 months, at 12.35% interest, and that's for top tier credit. So you can imagine the interest rate would be even higher with lower tier credit scores. So that's a lot of money. I'm going to break down the numbers, but the whole purpose of this video, and I'm just using this particular bike as an example, is can you really afford to buy a new motorcycle? My definition And it's not like a Dave Ramsey type of advice, you know, or you got to skip your morning coffee in order to do things with your money that's more fruitful. You know, I'm leaving it up to individual choice that people aren't going to be spending their rent money or their food money on a motorcycle instead of those things. And, you know, you got to figure in your other expenses like your car and everything else. So I'm just going to look at it strictly from the motorcycle perspective and in terms of a business practice as to whether you could actually afford a given bike or not. So I'm going to go through all the details. Stay with me. If you have any comments, please drop them in the comments section, and I'll respond to as many of them I can. Usually I respond to all of them. Also, please hit that subscribe button if you like this kind of content. So going back to this Harley Ultra Limited example, you're looking at payments of $441 a month. And again, that's not including any extended warranty, doesn't include any negative equity if you had it on a trade-in. It's just strictly looking at the price of this new bike in terms of the interest rate and the loan terms and your down payment. So that's a lot of money. It boils down to, with the down payment, a total outlay of over $45,000. And at 12.35% interest rate over 8 years, you're going to spend over $15,000 in interest charges alone. This is how it looks on the amortization schedule in terms of interest and principal each year. Obviously, the amount of interest that you pay in any given year goes down, so those interest charges are front loaded. Here's a plot of the loan balance over the life of the loan, in this case 8 years, what your interest is going to be as well. And as you can see towards the end, you're paying over $15,000 just in interest charges. So my definition as to whether you can afford to give a motorcycle or not is if for some reason you had to sell that bike, could you sell it for at least as much money as you owe on the bike so you can get out free and clear, so you don't end up defaulting on the loan, you're not relying on having to come up with extra cash to pay off the loan. It's just strictly, hey, I'm going to get at least what I owe on the bike for somebody to buy it from me. And a quick sale is going to usually be with a dealer, and that's going to be at wholesale pricing. So I'm going to look at both depreciation and just interest charges and things like that to kind of come up with what I think is the sweet spot as a litmus test for whether you can actually afford a given bike or not. So a couple of years ago, I was researching what the resale value was on a typical Harley, say a base street glide. And what I found is that if you go out about an 8-year period, the bike's worth maybe 50 to 60% of what you paid for it. And interestingly, if you take the purchase price in any given year and adjust it for inflation, it turns out it's about $25,000 a year, year in and year out. In fact, adjusted for inflation, the price has actually been going down a little bit. And I think that's an indication that Harley looks for greater and greater efficiencies. They apply more pressure to their suppliers. I think they're outsourcing component production overseas to lower their unit costs on these bikes. So in essence, the bike prices adjusted for inflation have been about the same year in and year out. But obviously anything you buy is going to depreciate. And typically a motorcycle is going to lose at least 20% of its value after the first couple of years. And if you spend extra money on accessories and upgrades, you can pretty much just kiss that extra money goodbye. You're not going to get it back on a trade-in or a sale for the most part. So let's look at a specific example. Here's a 2015 Harley Davidson Ultra Limited, and it retailed for over $27,000. The current retail on average price for this bike is $16,000. The reason I looked at 2015, that's 8 years ago. So I'm thinking, you know, if I buy a Ultra Limited now for around $30,000, what's the resale going to look like versus what I've paid in on that bike in terms of overall purchase price and interest charges? So you can say to yourself, okay, well, I bought this bike for $27,000 in 2015. Now it's worth $16,000. But keep in mind, that's $16,000 in today's dollars. If you adjust that for what it would be in 2015 dollars, it's only $12,500. So in 8 years, the true value of that 2015 Ultra Limited is less than half of the $27,000 purchase price. So if that happened during the last 8 years, it's probably fair to say that that's going to happen 8 years from now on this 2023 Ultra Limited if I were to buy it. Now, I'm going to give you some specific rules of thumb, as it were, or my advice on deciding whether you could actually afford a given motorcycle, no matter what the brand is. It's just general financial principles. So going back to what I said earlier, my definition of deciding whether you could afford a bike or not is if you've got to sell it. And you may not have time to sell it yourself. You may need to sell it in the winter. The wholesale prices or the trade-in value, of course we're not going to trade in if this scenario you're just going to get out free and clear from the bike. So you're looking at wholesale pricing, and that's much less than retail pricing. So you combine everything together, you really should be putting down a minimum of 20% down payment of the purchase price. And that's a price that's no greater than MSRP. Because if you're paying for surcharges, you're not going to get that back when you resell it. That money's gone. That goes in the dealer's pocket. That extra value doesn't exist with subsequent purchasers. So kiss that money goodbye. We're not talking about any negative equity that you may have carried over from a trade-in. Just for this example, just look at purchasing a brand new bike and where you're going to be in 8 years. So the other thing I would say is don't roll any other things into the payment or the purchase of the bike. Just strictly the purchase of the bike, less your down payment. That's what you're financing. So I suggested you put down a minimum of 20% down payment. I also suggest that you don't finance for more than 4 years because otherwise the amount of principal that you pay in any given month is going to be a lot lower. So if that happens, chances are at any given point in time, especially in the first few years, you're going to still owe more money on the bike than it's actually worth in terms of wholesale pricing. Another rule of thumb, and this gets a little stickier, is general financial guidance is when you're trying to figure out if you can afford a car payment, is that the car payment shouldn't exceed 10% of your gross monthly income. And I'm not sure that applies directly to a motorcycle. It may actually be less. Or you could just say, in general, motorcycles a discretionary purchase, and someone's total discretionary purchases shouldn't exceed about 30% of their income. That gets confusing. It also gets into individual values. Sometimes I'm riding the back roads of Kansas in rural counties, and I'll see somebody that lives in a single wide trailer, and that trailer may be worth $20,000, and they've got a $25,000 or $30,000 Harley parked out front. Now, some people would say that person has their priorities straight. Other people would say, hey, they shouldn't be buying a Harley if they're living in a single wide trailer. But again, that's a value judgment. I think it's up to each individual how they want to spend their money. We're just talking about raw affordability. And if you get into a situation where you're behind on payments, you're hard up for cash, and you can't really rely on selling the bike retail to get the maximum amount of money out of it, you're looking at selling it wholesale. And if that happens, you can't expect to have extra cash on hand to make up the difference between what the dealer's going to give you and the extra amount to get you to where you are whole in terms of what you owe on the bike. So, if you owe 20 grand on the bike and the dealer's going to give you 15,000, you got to come up with another 5 grand. So my advice is geared towards being in a situation that in any given point where you have to sell the bike, you get at least as much as you owe on it so you can just get out from under the thing. So with that in mind, let's look at this 10% rule. The average annual salary or income in the United States is about $70,000 a year. So that's $5,800 a month. 10% would be $580 a month in terms of a payment. Then this ultra limited example, they were looking at $440 some a month. So in terms of that litmus test, somebody could swing the monthly payment, but again, they got to look at all the other expenditures that they have. So to me, the discipline comes down to making sure you're making a down payment of at least 20%. You're not financing for over 4 years, and you're not rolling these other expenses, whether it's accessories, taxes, license, all that stuff into the payment, they'll be glad to do it, because obviously the more they finance, the more money they make off the interest charges. You know, these dealers will be glad to get you in way over your head if they can close the deal. Pretty aggressive, some would say predatory sales tactics. So just because someone's willing to finance a motorcycle doesn't mean that you can actually afford it. But if you do that, you're going to be upside down for many years on the loan. So that's my advice. Please let me know what you think in the comments section, and please stay tuned for future videos. Thanks very much, everyone.